agenda. So I think the panel shouldn't run too long, but obviously we will be interested in what we have to report. So let us start with apologies. Do we have any apologies at all?
Chair, we've yet to be joined by Councillor Stannard. It might be that his apologies are en route. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interest? No, okay. So we'll go on to the minutes of the last meeting, which, as you recall, was a very interesting, stimulating presentation, as I recall, from UEA, from Andrew Lovett, and some very useful questions and answers. So let's go through. I'll give the page numbers as per the bundle. So page 3. We happy with page 3? Page 4. Happy with page 4? Page 5. Page 6. So I've actually signed those as a true record, a true minute of that meeting. So we'll now come to the single item to be considered this morning, and that's the Home Energy Conservation Act report for 2021, sometimes abbreviated to the HECA. This is a report that will go to Cabinet, and we have an opportunity to have a look at it and make any notes or comments that we wish, bearing in mind what its purpose is. The Cabinet member who will take this to Cabinet was hoping to be here, or here, virtually here this morning, and but unfortunately, just as we are having a virtual meeting, her technology has broken down. She has had the blue screen of death, and will not be joining us. But Jackie has already said that she will pass on comments from this panel to Karen. Okay, so it's a draft report, and I underline or double underline the word draft. So as we go through it, we're concerned with the content, not a split infinitive or a missing semicolon. And with that in mind, we have Rachel Sowerby here, who is the Affordable Warmth Officer, who is going to take us through it. Now, Rachel, I don't know if you were able to, but have you managed to put something together, a presentation? Lovely.
Yeah, so I've got a brief presentation. I think it'll take about 10-15 minutes just to take you through kind of the headline
Lovely.
things from the report.
Okay, so I'll pass over to you, and Jackie, you have control of the sharing, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
Chair, Rachel will share her screen. Thank you.
Rachel will. Okay, thank you.
So hopefully you can all see that. Excellent, fantastic. I ran through it this morning, so my technology should work, but you never quite know. So welcome. As Kevin said, I'm Rachel. I'm the Fuel Poverty Affordable Warmth Officer for Norwich City Council. I'm just going to briefly take you through the HECA report. I'm sure you can appreciate it's a large report. There's a lot to get through. It's difficult to compress it all onto 14 slides. So I'm just going to run through some of the headline points, and then I'll take any questions, comments, feedback at the end. Oh. Hang on, I can't change my slides. Why can't I change slides? Oh, it's fine. My keys weren't working, my mouse is. So what is the HECA? So we're required by law to submit every 2 years a report demonstrating what energy conservation measures we've adopted in our local area to improve the energy efficiency, specifically of residential accommodation. We know that about 1/3 of emissions in the Norwich area come from residential accommodation, so it's a really important area for us to tackle. So this report contains a lot of information about housing in the city, and it pulls together a number of data sources, and it also looks at how this data can be used and how we can use this data to target specific areas with specific interventions. So our current report covers 2019 to 2021. It was approved by Cabinet in July 2019. We now need to present this updated report to fulfill our statutory requirements. And this new report gives an overview of the past 2 years and looking forward to the next 2 years. So I'm asking any questions, comments on this report. And I'll be referring to the document without the presentation, because as you can understand, there's a lot of information to compress onto these slides. So the first thing that report looks at, I just realised you can probably see your own faces, is the state of the city. So the current state of housing in the city. So as a council, we're responsible for 60% of the urban area of Greater Norwich, and that's about 143,000 residents, and we're a major providing of housing with around 15,000 council-owned buildings. The good news is our homes are far more energy efficient than other sectors. So our average SAP rating, which is energy efficiency rating, is 70.9. This compares to a private stock in Norwich of 63 and a national average of 65. All of our homes meet the decent home standard, and 98% of our homes also meet the Norwich standard. So that's really good. In terms of carbon emissions, they continue to decrease in the city. Per capita emissions have reduced by 48.5% since 2005, and fuel poverty has also reduced since our last report. And both of those indicators are explored in much detail later on. And these reductions have been seen despite increasing energy costs. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic will have an impact on that. And then within section 5, we've got a number of data outputs and modelling that we've done to help us target our interventions. So we have stock modelling data of the city, showing us the approximate energy efficiency, where we think likely cold hazards are, where we think the highest, well, we know where the highest fuel poverty, the highest excess winter deaths are. So we can use that to target those areas for appropriate energy interventions to try and reduce fuel poverty in those areas. And again, the report has a lot more detail about the work that we've done there. And then section 6 looks at carbon emissions across the whole city. So between 2005 and 2018, our carbon dioxide emissions have reduced by 48.5%, but we've had an increase in population of 12.3%. And our per capita emissions have always been considerably lower than both county and national levels. You can see on this graph, there's a kind of a pattern of peaks and troughs. This is the same as national and regional. It's mainly due to fluctuating weather and temperature over those years. But as I said, the overall trend is a significant reduction. So in 2005, it was 6.9 tonnes of CO2 per capita, and 2018, it's 3.5 tonnes of CO2. And this just shows domestic carbon emissions across Norfolk local authorities. So the same general pattern, they've all fallen, they've all followed the same peaks and troughs. This rise in 2010, it was mainly due to really cold weather. Norwich, which you can see is this blue dotted line here. So we have the second lowest level of carbon emissions in the county. We think part of this is because we've got a lot more homes connected to the gas grid, so they're not using coal or oil to heat their homes. And our average electricity use actually is far by the lowest in the county because of this. And the full report does consider connectivity to the gas grid and the work that we're doing to help residents that aren't on the gas grid. Okay, so this just pulls out electricity consumption and the annual cost of electricity, just to show you that relationship there. So as the cost rises, consumption tends to drop down. So in 2018, we had the lowest consumption since 2005. It's not all just due to energy prices rising. Obviously, increased energy efficiency, insulation also plays its part. I imagine that when we get the updated figures, COVID-19 will show a big increase in electricity use because people are staying at home, but we won't see that associated dip in electricity prices. We did see a spike in consumption in 2017, even though prices were rising. It's not 100% sure why, but there were quite a few significant weather events. So there was Storm Doris, Storm Eileen, ex-Hurricane Ophelia, and Storm Caroline, all of which are likely to increase demand. So although it does look like the main factor behind energy use is prices. There are obviously other contributing factors, things like home insulation, home renewable energy technologies like solar together. They're both important, and they also are considered in far more detail in the report. And then section 7 of the report considers fuel poverty. So fuel poverty currently in England is measured by the low income high cost indicator, where a household is considered to be in fuel poverty if they have required fuel costs that are above the national average, and were they to spend that amount, they would be left with income below the poverty line. Obviously, fuel poverty is always a shifting picture. Energy prices change, people's income change, and we're expecting to see it really shift in the next few years with COVID impacting incomes. And we've recently had an announcement from Ofgem and saying their standard tariff cap, which puts a cap on how much they can charge residents on prepayment meters and on standard variable tariffs, is going to increase. So from the 1st of April, about 15 million customers will see their bills go up by about £90 a year. And already we know 6 million adults have fallen behind on their energy bills due to COVID-19. So fuel poverty, we're not sure what's going to happen with it. It might increase. It's a fluctuating picture, but we've been working very hard as a council to try and reduce it in the city and to keep it at a somewhat stable level. And it has actually reduced since 2011. And we're one of the very few councils in the area that have seen that reduction, and indeed one of only 2 councils that have seen a decrease since our previous. And this just breaks down fuel poverty by ward. So every ward in Norwich has fuel poor citizens, and obviously members of SEEP, non-members of SEEP, we're more than welcome to receive referrals to you from residents who may be in fuel poverty. Please send them over to us. We'll be able to assist with appropriate energy advice. We know that fuel poverty can have a negative impact on all of our citizens, but within fuel poor household, there's always more vulnerable people who are at even greater risk. So the very old, the very young, people with long-term health conditions, they can really exacerbate those underlying health conditions, particularly cardiovascular and respiratory. Particularly children living in cold homes, they're more likely to suffer from chest problems, asthma, bronchitis, poor mental health. Their education is likely to suffer. Cold homes can slow down discharge following hospitals. And it's estimated that cold homes cost the NHS about £2.5 billion a year. So it's a really important issue to try and tackle. And section 7 as a whole in the report, it looks at fuel poverty, it looks at different tenures within the city, it looks at different housing types and how those can impact fuel poverty. And then also how we use this data to inform our work. So for example, you can see here that Nelson Ward has the highest fuel poverty in the city. Historically, that's always been the case. We've been targeting it, and fuel poverty has actually decreased in that ward over time. We think in part because of our targeting. And we can also see from the data in the report that our energy efficiency in our homes, our high SAP ratings, are supporting areas of low income where otherwise fuel poverty might be a lot higher. But because they're in relatively energy efficient homes, they're still able to heat them to a good standard. So just to zoom out a little bit to national targets to give you a bit of context. So the government has a fuel poverty target to upgrade as many fuel poor homes as reasonably practicable to EPC Band C by the end of 2030. The Committee on Fuel Poverty has estimated there's a 1.7 billion funding gap to meet this target. About 30% of homes in the UK, regardless of if they're fuel poor or not, meet this target. And it doesn't seem that government policy is going to be able to close that gap in time. The funding, unfortunately, just isn't there. In terms of fuel poor homes, only about 8% of them are Band C. We've done some calculations. We think in Norwich it could cost up to £500 million just to retrofit our homes with loft and cavity wall insulation. Obviously, the funding from government isn't there, but the government does recognise that local authorities are well placed to take a lead on this agenda. And regardless of the funding landscape, we're going to continue our work to reduce fuel poverty. And just break down the calculations that we've done on how much we think retrofitting private sector homes could cost. So that's a lot of money. There is some government support available. It's quite limited. You may have heard of the Green Homes Grant and specifically the voucher scheme, where individual householders can apply to get a voucher to get money off doing these energy efficiency works. But about 95% of that grant hasn't been spent yet because of delays of householders getting the vouchers, delays in installers getting paid. Some people have been waiting 5 months to get their vouchers. So although we do recognise and we know that improving housing is important to the city. It can help kickstart a green recovery. There are challenges that are barriers, and our full HECA report looks at the barriers, but also the opportunities within the city. And then just to highlight some of our key achievements, what we've been doing over the past 2 years, and section 8 in the report, again, goes into a lot more detail. So our big switch and save, our collective switching scheme, it now offers only renewable electricity as standard. And so far, we've saved residents £770,000 and 400 tonnes of carbon through switching. Our energy white label Raw Power offers renewable, affordable energy for the East of England. Our council housing at Goldsmith Street, which is Passive House standard, was awarded the Sterling Prize for architecture, and it already meets the 2030 standard for energy use per square metre. We've run further collective purchasing schemes for solar, and our most recent one offered battery storage. Altogether, those schemes have installed over 2 megawatts of solar energy in Norwich. And we've been successful in receiving a Green Homes Grant local authority delivery grant of just over £715,000. And we intend to use that to improve 80 homes in Norwich with insulation and solar technologies. So just to conclude, we know that councils can play a significant role in realising the benefits and opportunities of climate action in their areas. In some sense, it's a win-win. So action to retrofit homes helps address fuel poverty, it creates local jobs, it cuts carbon, it makes home more resilient. Overall, reducing domestic energy use has important environmental, social and economic benefits, and it contributes to council's corporate priorities. And this HECA report, it brings together data about energy efficiency, about fuel poverty, which we can then use to target our interventions to focus on the most vulnerable. Councils have a really important leadership role in creating low carbon and climate resilient communities. We want to ensure Norwich is safe and clean for all citizens and visitors to enjoy, and to create a sustainable city where the needs of today can be met without compromising the ability of future citizens to meet their own needs. And quality homes and affordable warmth are a cornerstone in the foundations of a sustainable city. So what are we going to do? We're going to continue to fight fuel poverty in the city. We'll continue to work with the third sector, with other local authorities. Sorry, I think I'm about to sneeze. Okay. We'll continue to utilize government grants to support housing in the city, and throughout all of our work, we'll continue to use this data in the HECA to inform our interventions to make sure they're the most effective. And the HECA towards the end also outlines some of the work we're planning to do over the next 2 years. And we're really proud of the progress we've made so far in reducing carbon emissions and fuel poverty, but we're not complacent. We're going to continue this work and hopefully continue to see a reduction. As we've already said, we'd like to take the report to Cabinet in June, and I welcome any comments or feedbacks that you have. And I'll stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Rachel. What I'd like to do now is just, there's lots of information there and you've got the report, so I'll just give you a little bit of time for it to sink in. So I think I'll give you 60 seconds. We'll have 60 seconds of silent thought, and then I will ask, I'll ask for questions. Right. So just bearing in mind the framework within which this panel was set up, it had sort of 3 key tasks. to identify what we're doing, to identify what we could do, or we can do rather, but we're not doing. And thirdly, to identify things that we could do with sufficient support from central government. And that might be, so for anybody who's got these thoughts or recommendations, I want them to bear that in mind. I think it might be useful to do what we did last time and have a question each. And for one person, naming no names, just one question, we'll go round. And then I'm not saying we won't get a second bite of the cherry, but it's a way of making sure everybody gets to ask a question and gets the answer. And I'm going to start off, I'm bearing in mind that third tier of our framework. Rachel, I'm going to ask you, if there was one thing that you would ask of central government to help us to improve this work, what would be at the top of your list? What would be number one?
Well, I think for me, what I would like to see is more long-term funding. So a lot of the problems we see is they'll bring in schemes and they'll be very short. So installers will have problems ramping up, bringing in staff because they know in 6, 9, 12 months, they're going to have to make them more redundant again. So I'd really like to see a long-term commitment from government.
Thank you. Jamie, it's your first question of many, I'm sure.
Thank you, Kevin.
Your first one, please.
Just on that point, I'm sure you'll be aware also that the LGA is lobbying for that longer term funding, and there's actually a Environment, Economy, Housing and Transport Board meeting this afternoon from the LGA, where I think they'll be lobbying for that. But I was just going to ask actually about sources of funding, which I think is a basis for those points 2 and 3 in a way of the framework for this panel, which is about where we can get sources of funding, because a lot of the funding in this report is sort of coming from government, and as we've highlighted, that's very sporadic and short term a lot of the time and insufficient. And I'm wondering if what work's being done to find alternative sources of funding, whether that's through working with the private sector, working with the LEP, working with community groups. So in Brixton, for example, they've got a community solar group that's also looking at doing energy efficiency measures, where they're also training up people who may not otherwise have much access to jobs to do that work. In Bristol, they're looking at setting up this City Leap project, which is laying out all the opportunities for retrofitting and energy efficiency measures and inviting partners to bid for those, to bring in the investment that's needed. Like you highlighted that in that one of those slides later on in the presentation, just the amount of funding gap. And so how are we going to meet that funding gap? Is there more work to be done to try and find that finance?
Well, I think the answer is yes, but I'll ask Rach to give an answer. But Graham, is this something that you'd like to come in on?
I'm happy to try and help out. It just occurred to me, the first thing I think I might suggest in terms of capturing some agreements, bearing in mind what Rachel said when you asked her the question, Kevin, about the importance of long-term funding. I was thinking that when we report that through to Cabinet and then submit the HECA formally to government, presumably that gives an opportunity to submit a covering letter with it, and we ought to make that point in it. I would have thought about the importance, because it is very noticeable as you go through this thing. We're bidding with our resources to get short-term resources to implement it, and frequently the funding comes with strings attached, and it comes with a requirement to spend it within a particular time frame, and it means we don't get as a council, we've committed to building a team with some expertise in this area, but it's relatively small. That the team that does this, it would be a more convincing and better system if we had the comfort that we were going to enjoy a continuity of funding to do these type of activities over the longer term. So I would have thought that perhaps you just to note whether you're happy for that to go in as at least one of the matters we refer to in any covering letter and cabinet report following this committee. The other point about the other funders, if you like, there's an awful lot. Members may recall that the local enterprise partnership attended the scrutiny committee sometime before Christmas. Sorry, I remember the event, but I can't remember the date. And they went through in some detail all the efforts that they were doing to promote the effectively a green economic recovery. And I think it's fair to say that members were generally pretty impressed by actually how. So I'm trying to remember the conclusions of the meeting, but they were they're quite active in that space. Against this whole picture, there's always the case that people could do more, because it's always a balance of their resources, but bearing in mind where they've come from as an organisation, they've got quite an active plan. I think the point that you probably ought to stress is the report that we're considering today is particularly around the home energy conservation issues, and on that it's not going to be the LEP or the other organisations that come and help us out, because we are the housing authority, we're the local council. Housing is one of the things that we do, so the primary responsibility of all those local agencies to deal with these issues is those housing providers. So I think this is one of the areas where the focus is genuinely on us, not at the other partners, to secure the funding. How we get that is the funding from our own resources and the funding from government that we're able to deploy. Clearly, that's the point. We'd like more continuity of that funding and more certainty, and frankly increased levels of funding, and we could do far more with it. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Well, I think that's brilliant, actually, your suggestion in the covering letter, a way of making that point, and it's something that in local government, we could put that in every covering letter. I'm thinking about the work with rough sleeping and so on, that if we're going to solve a problem long term, then we do need long-term reliable funding, absolutely. Rachel, I know Graham's given a good answer. Is there anything that you want to add, or shall we move on?
I just wanted to say that, yeah, obviously we're always looking for any sources of funding.
Yeah.
I know. Sorry,
Jamie, I know you're burning to come back, but and you're welcome to, as long as it's to do at the Hecker, because I do, we could stray out to what's the council doing, as opposed to thinking about the Hecker itself and what we're doing with our housing stock. So if what you've got to add is within that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, no, I mean, and as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Hecker covers housing of all tenure, so it's not just the council stock. And just picking up on Graham's point, yes, the council is the housing authority, but my point is about looking at sources of funding from those partners, and there is an incentive potentially for community energy groups to get involved, for the LEP in terms of providing funding for jobs. And so,
okay, I think you did make that point earlier about opportunities, but let's focus on the housing responsibilities. I'm going to pass on to Judith now. You're next on my screen, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Yes, I am going to focus on what we are doing as a council with our own housing stock. Excuse me. And it is around the Norwich standard. I mean, we are looking for small gains now. So can I throw into the mix the idea that when we replace and upgrade the council housing stock, we are a bit more flexible with what people want. And obviously there's an opportunity perhaps to be even more flexible when we take the contract in-house next year. And it's to do with replacing baths. And I've been talking about this for about 5 years now. We do replace a bath with a bath, whether or not the tenant wants it. Now, sometimes somebody might be my age, coming up to 70, and they don't want a bath because they can't get in. Well, more to the point, you can't get out. So if you ask to have it replaced with a shower, the answer is no. Now, we do need flexibility, and we're focusing really on the social benefits of this. It keeps people in their homes longer. That's the social benefit. It keeps them healthier longer. It keeps them cleaner, because some people can't actually use their baths. And this isn't about disabled people. We do know that if you're disabled, you do get more help to get those sorts of provision. But if you're just getting old and you don't want a bath anymore, the answer is definitely no. And so there's so many gains here. It's a social gain, keeping people in their homes longer, keeping them independent, keeping them healthy, keeping them clean. But also it means they're not running baths and taking up a lot more energy in heating water. It takes a lot less to heat a shower. So there must be energy conservation gain there. So this is a small point, but I think when we're focusing in on what we as a council can do, this is something that we can definitely do. And it may apply to a very small section of the community, but there are tenants, I assure you, who are crying out for showers to be put in rather than a bath that they can't use. It's an absolute waste of resources. And I've had people say, I won't use that bath, but they insist on putting a new one in for me. What can we do about it?
I'm sure if Gail was here, she'd replied to you.
Were you aware of that, Rachel?
I think, can I also say, I'm under the impression, you might correct me here, Judith, that when we replace a bath, it's a bath and a shower is fitted, isn't it? Is that not
the shower's over the bath, so we haven't got over the problem. You have to get your leg up over the bath. You obviously haven't had any problems, Kevin, but I assure you, when people get to even at 50, you can have a bit of arthritis and it's terribly difficult. It's no good bath over the shower over the bath. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Oh well, I'll leave that with Rachel. I guess Judith's made a point. You probably there's no answer that you can give, but you're welcome to say something if you want.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in terms of the HECA report, it's more about bringing together data and sort of what we've been doing, rather than making, I suppose, specific recommendations for changes to things like the Norwich standard. So
but we could do more, couldn't we? This is one area.
But Judith, it's not the job of this committee. We're not here to consider that. It's got nothing to do with the HECA report whatsoever. I know it's one of your really important, passionate things for you. This is the wrong place to raise.
Well, I thought the chair said, what are we doing? What could we do?
Yeah.
And could, what else could support what we're doing?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is one area where we as a council are failing to provide for our tenants.
Yeah, Judith.
And it's to do with energy conservation, isn't
it?
Judith, you've made your point, and we've all heard it, seriously. But thank you. Laura, have you a question for Rachel?
Yes. I was looking at page 69 of 86 of the report, and it's tackling excess cold. It says that no council stock homes have failed HSRS due to excess cold, but privately owned privately owned properties have. And I was wondering, will we be focusing, I don't know if this is the right place again, will we be focusing in those privately owned homes in the top 4 wards that have the highest fuel poverty, which are Nelson, University, Wensum and Sewell? Obviously, I have an interest in 2 of those wards, living in one and also representing one.
Yeah, so in terms of our targeting, we do obviously want to target our areas with the highest fuel poverty, and we work closely with our private sector team, with our enforcement team, to try and get those cold hazards down. When it comes to targeting cold hazards, we don't tend to target specifically based on a ward, because we just tend to target in general where we know there are hazards, but we do certainly target those highest wards with fuel poverty with our interventions.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, I meant to say thank you for such a comprehensive report and a really good presentation.
Thank you, Laura. Denise.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you very much for all the work you're doing to reduce fuel poverty. I wanted to ask about Templemere, please, which is a relatively recent housing development. And the proposal is to install gas central heating systems to replace the inefficient electric heating at the present. And obviously at some time in the future, gas central heating systems, gas heating is going to have to be replaced in order to achieve net zero. Well, we've got an earlier target than that. We've got to achieve 68% cut in carbon by 2035. And so I wondered, in looking at putting in gas central heating, the council looked at installing non-fossil fuel heating systems, because at some point in the future, the gas heating in Templemere is going to have to be replaced by non-fossil fuel. And so I wondered if you'd looked at that, and if so, what the cost difference is, please. And yeah, thank you very much.
So in terms of Templemere, so that was external funding that we accessed with Broadland District Council through the Warm Homes Fund. And that was funding specifically for gas central heating, first-time gas central heating at no cost to residents and at no cost to the council. Obviously, we appreciate some of the tensions between putting in gas in terms of fuel poverty and emissions, but because of the area that Templemere is in, because of the data we hold, we felt it was an appropriate place to target because it was going to be reducing fuel bills so significantly. And so if the reason we went with the gas central heating was because that was what the scheme was specifically set up for, and that's how we were able to access the funding. And just to say on Templemere, at the same time, a lot of the homes that have been getting gas central heating have also been getting loft and cavity wall insulation covered under that declaration. So their general energy efficiency has been improving there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel. That's really... Mike Stannard, have you got a question you want to put to Rachel?
Yeah, I was just wondering about how we compare with other local authorities, and whether or not there's any best practice that we can learn from elsewhere, or good practice, and to what extent do we look at what other local authorities are doing and compare and benchmark and try and learn from them?
Yeah, so within the report, we've got comparisons in terms of our carbon emissions and in terms of our fuel poverty, and then in some more specific things like gas connectivity, solar panels installed. In terms of comparisons, we tend to do pretty well, to be honest. We've got quite low emissions, quite fuel poverty, but obviously we work closely with the other district on things like the Warm Homes team.
Yeah, I was thinking more, sorry Rachel, I was thinking more nationally.
Okay.
Obviously there's local comparisons, but I was thinking more nationally.
I think, sorry, Richard, did you want to?
So yeah, on nationally, we do review works that are in or funded through the Ofgems innovation funding. So we've led on a couple of things. So we were the first city council to do the collective switching, and the first first council nationally to run a Solar Together scheme. But we're also looking at what other pilots are happening around behind the meter services and other way of monetizing energy efficiency more generally. And yeah, those are the sort of ongoing studies that we're sort of dipping into as and when we have time, when we're not delivering the measures to households.
That's fine. We need to be looking at other like-minded authorities and seeing, what they're doing. Obviously, I won't make any comments about the other districts and the political complexion of them and the likely priority they give to this in Norfolk. I'll keep that to myself.
Right. Thanks for that. Adam, I don't know. I know you've had connectivity problems. Are you with us?
I am. I'm losing about 50% of what's being said, so I'm trying my best.
Okay.
If,
Have you got?
if you can hear me,
Yeah.
if you can hear me, I was going to ask Rachel and Richard about what additional take up of raw power was like over the winter following the Facebook advertising we did to promote it. Obviously, the more residents we can get onto raw power, the better for the environment and saving them money on their energy bills. So I was just seeking an update on that.
I'm afraid the honest answer is I don't have those numbers. I'm not sure what the uptake has been over winter, but I'm happy obviously to find them out, unless Richard, you have got anything more up to date.
I know because we made a difficult decision not to send out the Citizen magazine to citizens over the COVID crisis, that's probably affected the amount of acquisitions that we've been making on raw power, but can certainly look into it.
Thanks, Richard.
All right. Oh, well, I think all the members have asked questions, and looking at the time, I think we can try another one. There you go, Jamie. Get in there, but please remember what we're trying to look at. We're looking at the HECA report today. Thank you.
I know that, Chair. I'm just coming back on actually something that is mentioned in the report, which is solar installations, and it mentions that that it's no longer sort of financially viable due to the removal of the feed-in tariff. And I just wanted to ask whether there is actually ways that could be made financially viable. So, for example, there's Public Power Solutions, which is a Swindon-owned company, Swindon Council-owned company, have been installing large-scale solar on social housing at a large scale, which makes it financially viable. Or alternatively, Warrington Borough Council have been setting up solar farms and then piping the electricity to their own housing estate. Again, getting the economy of scale. So I was wondering if there is ways of making that financially viable, and is that something that we're looking at?
So I'll just come in briefly. I just wanted to say, I think, I don't know if I misheard your question, but I did want to clarify that we do discuss solar within the main body of the report, pages 55 to 58, but I don't know if I misheard the start of the question. In terms of this report, obviously we were mainly looking at domestic, which was our Together, our local authority, but I think, Richard, you might be better placed to talk about the larger schemes.
So yeah, I mean, we are in active conversation with various stakeholders around energy sleeving and other forms of large-scale solar, but I'm not too sure they're relevant to the HECA in this respect, because it's more, well, maybe it is relevant for the HECA. It's more of the council's emissions reduction sort of program. But yes, Jamie, we are looking into these things.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? I suppose in one sense you're right, but in terms of the panel and what we consider, perhaps this is something then that would really be a useful future discussion point for one of the future panels. So, I'm grateful for you for raising that, Jamie. It's something that I know Richard's been looking at for some time and waiting for various legislative changes. And I wonder if I can call on one of the more senior members. But before I became a councillor, we were apparently involved in one failed attempt to get some kind of solar energy generation. Is that the case? Sometime in the past?
We've looked at it twice before, and each time where we were about to make a decision, the government reduced the feed-in tariffs and scuppered the scheme. But it is something that we're continually looking at, and if there's some changes in the future, sorry, that's my dog, around behind the meter services, cost of the panels, the cost of electricity. It's like a fine balance that enables you to go or no go on the projects, because ultimately, if we're trying to find our own solutions to funding this shortfall, it needs to be done in a way that protects all council services. We can't take any risks with the sort of difficulties that we're facing during this financial crisis.
Yeah, well, thanks for raising that, and thanks for that last point, Richard, because it does raise something which Rachel has brought out, which is that holy trinity of the social, the economic, and the environmental, and the HECA is all about that. Judith, hi. Right, okay, so Laura, do you want to ask another question? No, all gone. Denise.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to raise a matter which I think is probably for Graham's covering letter, and that is, everyone's talking about roadmaps at present. So I hate that term, but I think it's very appropriate here, and that is moving to net zero. Obviously we're all moving to net zero within a really short space of time. So what is the local councils, obviously allied to the government's roadmap for moving housing to net zero? And does net zero for housing mean grade A or band A, of which we have none in the city? Or does it mean moving everything to band C, which is way below net zero? I'm not really sure what the aim is here.
Can I just frame that question in terms of the panel's framework, and what Denise quite strongly has touched upon is that third and important aspect. What could we do with government help? And I wonder to improve what's in the HECA at the moment. Graham, do you, framed within that, what would your response be?
Some of this, it strikes me, is it's not directly related to the HECA, because clearly we've done as a council, we've adopted an environmental strategy that sets a sort of what is an ambitious target of getting to be a net zero council through our own activities by 2030. And we're also working with the City Vision Group, having declared the climate emergency, to look at how, as a wider place of community leadership, we can address that challenge of reaching net zero in advance of effectively the national target of 2050. And certainly the ambition is to be able to achieve that by 2040, if not sooner. But that work is still going on with the sort of City Vision Group and the wider partnership to take that forward, and so we can properly understand that. Within that, I think it's fair to say that we haven't broken it down in terms of that wider place-based, how we're going to get to zero carbon in one area as opposed to another, how that target is going to be measured and where it's going to come from. I'm sure that work will be needed over the coming years to put flesh on those bones. But at the moment, I think we're in the position of trying to maximise our performance to get the carbon emissions down from across the board as quickly as we can, using the funding that is available to us, rather than in the process of setting particular targets and defining them in detail that we don't have a way of effectively planning to deliver. Because I think this is some of the problems, particularly around home energy. We don't have the certainty over funding. We don't necessarily have the powers. And if the government is effectively serious about delivering something approaching net zero in the domestic housing stock across the country, there's a whole set of measures that are going to be needed about retrofitting measures to the existing stock, encouraging private homeowners to take out boilers, gas boilers, replace it with other things. You know, there's a whole load of measures that need to come. And you know, as a local council, even with some powers that we've got in relation to housing to tackle excess cold and the like of it, we can interfere at the edges of that. But what you really need is national leadership and a constant supply of funding to be able to deliver that. And so, you know, clearly, I think as this becomes apparent, and I frankly would expect considerable government movement on this arising from, you know, COP21 later in the year, further announcements, I think at some point we're going to have to review our strategies to set out precisely, you know, targets in these particular areas, break them down. I don't know, would envisage that sort of work would be done in a future refresh of the environmental strategy. I think to try and do that artificially, if you like, now and drive things by locally set targets that we're not really in control of whether we can achieve or not would be, yeah, something we haven't done that work. So in terms of, I'm not aware that we've got a target for when we expect the housing stock in Norwich to deliver climate net zero in terms of its performance, or how we're going to actually get there. We're at the moment of doing works to address, you know, excess cold, provide affordable warmth, introduce environmental measures where we can afford it, where we can get the money from government.
Thanks for that. I think also it sounds as though our roadmap at the moment is get the government to start producing a roadmap. It is a nice about leadership.
That's right. That's why I'm thinking of making a point in Graham's covering letter, to prod the government, because I think it's urgently required.
Yeah. Okay, Mike, have you got a question? Oh, thank you.
No, I don't have another one, but I think Richard had his hand up.
All right. This is the trouble with limited screens.
I was just going to note, if we are going to put something in a covering letter, we could maybe use the scatter tool to identify the amount of emissions and what amount needs to be reduced by when to achieve the government's target. So we could just run that through the scatter tool if you wanted a figure.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Right. Well, you've all had... Yeah. Yes.
Just to remind you, you're making recommendations to Cabinet. So presumably the recommendation would be to the Cabinet member to write to the government to accompany.
Thank you, Jackie, as always. Yes, thank you. Judith, go ahead.
Yes, before I go, I hope this is relevant this time. Do we have anything on our website about the Green Homes scheme?
So we have on our Cozy City website, which is our specific website for private home energy efficiency, we have an information page about the Green Homes Grant, the vouchers, how to apply, contact details if people are unsure.
Okay. Right. I'm just looking at the time, and let's have a quick last round. I know, Jamie, and you're a disciplined fellow, Jamie, so you'll be able to make sure you're referring to the HECA. Go ahead.
You don't need to remind me every time, Chair. I will have a recommendation based on what Graham's just said, by the way. But my question is about actually involving the UEA in some of this work on the HECA. I know that that's something that Brighton and Hove have recently been doing. They've got the University of either Brighton or Sussex looking at how to improve energy efficiency in their housing stock. And I wonder if that's something that we can draw on with the UEA.
Well, go ahead. I was going to say, UEA has been a stalwart supporter and partner throughout these processes. But Rachel's going to come in with some detail.
I think I was probably going to say a similar thing, which is that the
Yeah.
UEA, we've been working with them, on our environmental strategy refresh, things like that. Although they haven't specifically, consulted on the HECA, we do work.
Yeah, but they do, and we've also got the works going on what the good economy. I can't remember what it's called now, but Mike's nodding, so he can speak about it. Can you do?
That's totally unfair. Yes, we have got the good economy work as well, and clearly environmental matters, sustainability are a key part of that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Laura. Do you want a third question?
No, thank you.
Good. Denise.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I've written down my questions, otherwise I can't remember them. So on page 17, the estimated 1,676 private sector dwellings with a category level 1 of excess cold. That's a very large number of people suffering miserable living conditions. And Rachel, you've talked about the work you're doing on fuel poverty. I just wondered what the way forward for specifically targeting targeting these level 1 houses, please, and for ensuring that they reach band C by 2030, which is not very far away.
Yeah, so like I said, we do work with our enforcement team in private sector. I would say it's probably best maybe to go to them, and we do work closely with them. I know a lot of their work is a lot more reactive just because of the kind of resource level that they have in terms of enforcement. Obviously, we're aware of these dwellings, and like you said, we're not pleased that we've got this number of dwellings, and we're hopeful we can use this data to target them, to let them know this isn't acceptable. And sorry, Richard, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, some of the dwellings actually are difficult to work with in terms of installing the measures, even if they were free. There's a number of houses that we've identified where measures would be suitable and free, yet the tenants have refused the works to go ahead for one reason or another. Maybe they've got hoarding issues, or they don't want to engage with the council.
Thank you. Right. Mike, one last chance, I think. You're happy. Okay. Adam, you there? Are you there, Adam?
I am. Sorry I haven't been able to play a full part in the meeting. Firstly, just to thank Rachel and Richard for all the amazing work they do. Reading everything they do, I've no idea how they find time to do it all. So congratulations on that. And I think congratulations as well to our small private sector housing team for all they do, with only 3 of them in the team. I was just going to ask one last question about the potential for One Planet Norwich 2021, whether there's been any discussions regarding that, and if that's totally off the cards, whether we're looking at doing something virtually. Thanks.
I haven't really been part of those discussions. I think we're better placed. Just to say, we do still have our Facebook page going. We've reached about 6,000 people since August 2020. So we are still engaging with residents via our Facebook page to help them make some environmentally friendly choices.
Yep, so the Facebook page is ongoing. The event is postponed to 2022, as are other events throughout the council. It's a sort of group decision.
Is there anything we could do on Zoom or something for instead, or as an alternative? Or
Adam, I think it's a very nice campaign, but in relation to the HECA.
Well, I'm looking onto the future action section.
Yeah.
I know actually recently there has been a rise in different organisations debating these issues. So in theory, maybe I would have to have a look into it.
Yeah, I know you're very busy. Thank you for all you do.
Okay. I think we seem to have had a good go at this, but I know Jamie wants to suggest a recommendation. And so I'll ask Jamie for that in a moment, that suggest a recommendation, and then I'll see if anybody else has. And I think, quite honestly, it's great to see Richard here, but he needs to get back to worrying about his family, which is a father's right and duty. But so let's see if we can wrap this up. Jamie, you've got a burning suggestion for a recommendation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Graham said that we haven't done, we haven't got a roadmap for the actions needed to decarbonise the housing stock. And my recommendation would be to look at what Bristol have done with their City Leap prospectus, which sets out the sort of costings or estimated costings and what needs to be done under 6 different headings of decarbonisation, including housing stock, and is inviting partners to bid for that. So the reason for doing that is to set out what are the costs, what do we need to do, expected costs, and who's going to be involved in delivering that. And I think that's really important that we do that now, because we will potentially be getting more funding coming down the line from around COP. And so we need to be ready to do that. And, even if there's not more funding coming down the line from government, there are potential sources of funding from the third sector, from community municipal investment bonds, other private sector sources of finance, which we can be leveraging. And this is an important area for fuel poverty and for climate emergency, which is urgent. And so we can do that now.
Right, thanks. I'll just come back on that. Obviously, that's not a recommendation for this HECA report. I think you're raising important issues and something for this panel to look at in another meeting. I think some really interesting ideas that you've raised there, and so I'm not poo-pooing them, but it's not a recommendation for this report, but they are damn good recommendations. Jamie. Okay, Judith, have you got any?
Yeah, sorry, we're calling this a recommendation, but it's not been moved or seconded. Are we going to move? I mean, I'm not quite clear. What is it just the minuted as part?
I think it's something to be minuted.
Yeah,
but it's not I don't see how it can be a recommendation with regard to the HECA. So it's just something that I'm saying I note. Damn good idea, and we'll bring it forward to discuss it at another panel. Is that okay?
Can I suggest a sort of compromise that could be included in the HECA, which is to include a section on potential alternative sources of finance?
We can certainly ask that of Karen. Yeah, okay. But I still think you've raised some good issues for us to look at in the future panel. And I'm sure Denise will second you if we make that a recommendation. Yeah.
Yeah, that does.
And Denise can.
Sorry, Chair. That does tie in with the letter that you want to recommend to Cabinet.
Right. Graham is going to come with a solution.
In my mind's eye, I thought, arising from the debate, the panel might wish to agree a recommendation to recommend to Cabinet to approve the HECA report for submission to the government, but suggest that submission be accompanied by a covering letter that draws out the importance of securing long-term stable funding to address home energy issues, and also the government of publishing a clear roadmap for how it is intending the housing stock of the UK to become net zero over time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that will fit well. Any other recommendations that?
Sorry, Chair, can I just comment? That's, I think, a slightly separate recommendation to what I was suggesting.
Well, no, I did hear you, and what I was thinking is that we save that for a panel.
My second recommendation, which is to include in the HECA alternative sources of funding. They're not necessarily government sources of finance.
Well, that's a future action, isn't it? So
yeah, so it can be included in the future actions under the HECA.
Well, if let's look at that. Presumably Denise will second that.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And I can't see a problem, except Rachel.
Sorry, I just wanted to say there is a in our future actions one seeking new funding opportunities for energy reduction projects.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's been done. Thank you. Glad. Anybody else then? No. All right. Well, look, let's close this down. And I think what I'd like to do is give both Rachel and Graham an opportunity just to tie up. Rachel, because specifically the HEC, and Graham just because of the contextual, or the context that he can give to all of this. So, Rachel, is there anything that you'd like to just bring us together and close before we finish?
I just wanted to thank everyone, I guess, for the discussion and the recommendations. And obviously we'll take all of that on board before we take it through to Cabinet.
Okay, and thank you very much, Rachel, and thanks for the presentation as well. And of course, these are these icebergs, aren't they? And underneath what we see is the presentation and the report, but underneath that is a heck of a lot more work. So thank you for that. Graham, is there anything you want to say and sort of contextualise this in terms of the council policy? And
look, sir, clearly the whole area that we're involved in here is something that is active. It's a live political issue. There's a great deal of pressure and public interest in this area, as I say, through the work that we're doing on the city vision and some of the wider national movements. And I expect that, I think we all know we need to do more in this space and we need to inject some impetus into it. But we're having to balance that with the resources on the council, competing priorities, some very real challenges of keep making the budget balance and keeping the show on the road and delivering those core services we need to do to keep the council ticking over, etc. So we're aware that it's a particular challenge. I thought the debate today was really helpful in terms of assisting us in taking some of those challenges forward. Particular, I'm grateful for Rachel and Richard and the amount of work they put in. I think it's helpful, this report, because it actually highlights the breadth and the continuity of the work that is going on. But I'm also grateful for your the members' interest and scrutiny of it through this panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think the fact that this has come to SEEP shows that kind of joined up approach of the economic, social and the environmental, and you can't sort of channel them or pigeonhole them in one place, that they are, a whole. And something I always remember Adam Clark, that they have to move on together. If one goes out of kilter, then the others fall behind. So it's a way of bringing them forward, all three at the same time. And I think, the HECA report is a fantastic example of that. So on that, I'm going to close this meeting, and thank you very much for getting up and appearing dressed in front of the cameras. And I wish you well. Keep safe. Bye.
Bye.